I feel it's safe to say that currently, for the time being at least, English is the modern lingua franca for various reasons: military, economic, cultural, so on and so forth. Your input?
Yeah, I agree. English is definitely the number one right now because of the internet, because various languages have become the lingua franca throughout history, Latin being one for a time period, then it was Greek, then it was French. The upper levels of like European society used to all speak that as like the common tongue. But the thing is none of them were widespread beyond their region. Whereas English, it seems like is set to just become like the default human language, especially because the internet is like the space in which everyone operates in.
Yeah, since it was created and developed, and it's still mainly operated out of the United States, which has an English dominant language, looks to be that for a little while as well.
Right. And I know like it at least I've seen this opinion a lot within like linguist circles and whatnot that, no language is necessarily better or worse than any other language. But there are certain languages that are more suited to international usage. Chinese is something that I think about wherein it has a lot of speakers. I think it's one of the most spoken languages, but it is a poor lingua franca because one, all the speakers are concentrated in China, and it's only seldom used in places like Singapore, very rarely used outside of the mainland. And also the way that it's expressed through characters and symbols, it's very difficult to adapt to other languages, and very hard to translate it over to computers. Because I know other languages that use different alphabets like Korean Hangul, Arabic script, or Russian Cyrillic, they have difficulty uh, expressing foreign words, but they can still do it. Whereas Chinese is rigid characters and symbols. So the best they can do is use characters and symbols that already exist and try to make an approximation of what a name would sound like. And that's just like one example. Pinyin, another like version of the Chinese language that doesn't use like the traditional characters, is used online a lot just because like up until very recently, it was very hard to basically convert the Chinese language into like computers and stuff, just because like every sound and every word has like its own character.
Yeah, I remember reading a news article not too long ago actually, and how there's an issue with modern Chinese students. The issue is writing Chinese characters because of their because they mainly use keyboard keyboard to type, and that loses a fair bit of the Chinese language. And also feel that China is the Chinese language. I guess Mandarin is the main variation of Chinese, is not destined to be lingua franca for a moment because China has a very there's a lot of interest in keeping China isolated um, from outside influence.
As in the Chinese government
Yeah,
is interested in keeping, yeah, so I know the Chinese government isn't the only one that does that. I remember reading a few years back that the government of France used to have some sort of governing body that regulated the French language, and one of their main things was trying to avoid this encroachment of English words in the French language. So they would create like French versions of English words that had already like permeated the French language. Um, and that was their attempt to stop like the Anglicization of their language, which I think is important. I think languages should be protected. I'm not a big fan of like languages adopting English words, especially if there is already a word for that in the original language. And I know it's becoming a huge problem in almost all the languages I speak. Like, um, as you know, like Russian uses words like computer.
Yeah.
Or they'll even say like "iti shopping" instead of saying like to going to the shopping mall. Nepali, it's weird, but whenever I go to Nepal, people are always shocked by the words that I use because the Nepali that I learned is from my parents who grew up in the, 80s and 90s in Nepal. I've been isolated from that, and as a result, the language and words that I use are seen as almost archaic because they use the original Nepali words for it rather than the English language. Um, and it's a shame, I think, when you're speaking a language and then you have to think of a word in another language because you cannot find an equivalent substitute. So I don't know what the solution to that is. I think that's kind of inevitable, but I'm not opposed to some organization at least attempting to preserve the language, like the French government, or it sounds like even the Chinese government does.
Yeah, I guess I'll clarify and say more in the fact of, like the Great Chinese Firewall and such. Not
Right.
necessarily maintaining it's it it does maintain the Chinese language and Chinese culture, but it's kind of more, is it yeah, just I was argue kind of excessive isolation.
Mm.
I know for a fact, yeah, again, like, yeah, a lot of different languages are adopting English words and phrases to describe certain things, which is not uncommon since the English language has a lot of words taken directly from German, French, such as it rendezvous, French grenadier. It's also